We've got a lot to cover with church crime news this week. We've got 26 Christians murdered by jihadists in Africa. We've got here stateside, we got a couple of people that barricaded themselves inside churches. We had two separate incidents of those. We got a murder in front of a Minnesota church. We got a man that assaulted volunteers. Now, with everything that we talk about crime-wise here, Christian Warrior Training, we will always tell you how you can protect yourself and how you can prevent something like this from happening at your church to help protect yourself. Let's go ahead and get started. There's a lot to go over. All right, since I've last gone on the air with you, we hit 100,000 subscribers, and I got that from YouTube. Don't really care about recognition from YouTube. What I look at that right there, that little plaque, it tells me that I'm reaching well over 100,000 Christians that want to know how to keep their church safe and how to bring new people to Christ. I absolutely love that. If you go over to the newsletter, in fact, let's switch over to the newsletter right now. This is a newsletter I'm talking about. I do 2 newsletters minimum every week. First one, it happens on Saturday. I talk about all the crime that occurs at churches throughout the United States, and I pick 3 stories that are important that happened overseas. Usually it's persecution that has to do with Christians being persecuted. The other one that I do is usually these feature articles on Wednesday, and like this one is recognizing pre-attack indicators. I've got one best self-defense insurance for people that work in church security, not just like you walking around, but like for your working church security, what's the best? I break it all down for you. Tons of good stuff, plus free training. We're going to talk about that free training. I am doing this all for free for you because you're a fellow follower of Christ and you want to keep everybody safe. So it's free to you. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to stop off in Frisco first. Now in Frisco, we have a man that was had some warrants and ran from the police. So that man is Daniel Ryan Keith, and he was arrested after fleeing that car stop and hiding in the ceiling of the First Frisco Global Methodist Church in Frisco, Texas. Now, Keith had an outstanding warrant, ran into the church, which also houses a preschool, prompting the lockdown. Now, police used a drone to locate him, and he was arrested without incident. Keith was charged with multiple offenses, including evading arrest and failing to identify as a fugitive. That's an interesting crime. I don't think I've ever heard that one before. All right, so each week, we talk about how somebody flees the police, and if there's a church nearby, they're going to go to the church. Why do they go to the church? Because they're trying to find sanctuary, and it's like, hey, you can't touch me. King's X, I'm in the church. You have to leave me alone, and that is not true. We will come after you even if you're in the church. Now, the sad thing is that when he went into the church and got into the ceiling, there was a preschool next door, which puts the children at risk. My advice to you is for you to pay attention to police activity that is occurring in your area. If you see a number of officers off on somebody and it is very near your church, I would probably lock the church down to make sure the person couldn't escape and run into your church, because you are the place they're going to run. If they're running by the church, they're going to go in there. Not 100%, but it's greater than 50%. I'd say it's greater than 75%. Now, if you don't catch this and you're in your church and a fugitive runs into the church and police are hot on their tail, go ahead and evacuate everybody out of the church. Just evacuate everybody to a safe area and give the law enforcement officers the keys to the church. They're going to need it to start searching areas, and just give them whatever they need to go ahead and apprehend that person. If they come into the church and the police didn't see that, which happens occasionally, just make sure you evacuate everybody and call the police and let them know he's in the church. Now, I'll give you a good example for my church. Was coming into church, I had seen a police chase come right past me. And when I came into the church, I contacted our security team and was like, hey, man, did you see the police pursuit? And they're like, yeah, it was pretty cool. And I'm like, hey, man, you should probably go heavy on the doors, break us down to only 2 entrances that people can come into, and then put armed people at those doors in case that guy decides or ends out crashing, runs from the police and comes into the church. And you can see people look like they do that. Absolutely. Just something to think about. I think it's important just to keep a heads up on your people. All right. Next up, we're going to go over to Minnesota, where a man was charged in a beating death of a woman outside of Minneapolis church. Now, Byron Vinicio Vargas Bautista, let me see if I got his picture anywhere. Oh, I don't. He was charged with second-degree murder after allegedly beating 57-year-old Felicia Smith to death outside a Minneapolis church in July. Now, surveillance footage showed Bautista and Smith together on the night of the crime, and police later ID'd him as the suspect. Now, Bautista, who claims no memory of the event, of course not. Why would he remember the event, right? Was arrested 2 months after being recognized by police officers. He remains in custody with a $1 million bail, awaiting his next court appearance in October. Now, the victim was found right outside of that church, and the case was solved by the use of surveillance video. So it's unknown if the video was from the church or a nearby residence or a business, but it is important that each church have a 4K video system, and we're going to see that coming up when we go to property crimes. We're going to see a church that has a 4K video system, and you'll see why I keep repeating that over and over. Now we're going to head over to Brighton, where Brian Spring, who's 48 years old, assaulted volunteers at St. Mary's Church in Brighton after seeking their help because he had soiled himself. He verbally abused and physically attacked 3 volunteers. In a separate incident, Spring, intoxicated and on drugs, assaulted a staff member at a shelter housing facility and resisted arrest, attempting to headbutt and spit on police officers. On a side note, if you have those flags out hanging outside of your church, you are more likely to be involved in crime because, well, I'm seeing a big rash of people stealing the flags because they're upset about what they're doing. Also, really, you're kind of going against the Bible there, but just my 2 cents. I digress. Let's get back on track. One of the things that I recommend that people take is something called recognizing pre-attack indicators. I'd written an article about that before, and it goes over everything about people, what people do before they punch you, attack you, or do anything like that. If you're dealing with homeless, if you're dealing with marginalized communities, my recommendation is you go ahead and read that article. It's in the newsletter. And just, if I can almost guarantee you that this guy, he's on drugs, he had soiled himself. You already know that the chances of you being assaulted are probably escalated a little bit more, so you should be wary. And then if you see those pre-attack indicators, disengage from that person, and you can either try de-escalation techniques, which I have that free training right here. You can head over there and enroll now and look. It's free, absolutely free. I don't charge for that. It's my gift to you as a fellow follower of Christ. I have lots of training classes over there that you can take. If you head over there, here's all the free classes that you can take. I'll add more as I have time. We also have digital products like operations order, a policy manual, a sex offender MOU, your team checklist. I mean, there's tons of stuff over there that you can get that will help you deal with all the issues that might come up at your church. All right, now 2 juveniles were charged after a Jefferson County break-in and a carjacking. Now 2 juveniles in Jefferson County, Tennessee, were charged after breaking into Ebenezer Methodist Church and then later stabbing a man during a carjacking on Valley Home Road. Now, the victim was hospitalized and he's in stable condition. The juveniles were arrested after a police pursuit, with one found to have overdosed and needing medical attention. Now, charges include aggravated assault, carjacking, and burglary. More than likely, they're doing these crimes to feed their drug habit. Really, there's no professional burglars making money off burglarizing people. But I just want to throw something out, and I put this in the newsletter. What would you do if you encountered those 2 juveniles inside of your church after being broken in, after your church has been broken into? So you see signs of a break-in and you encounter these 2 juveniles. What would you do? The best thing you could do is disengage, call 911, monitor it. If they leave the church, let police know and where they go. That would be the best way to go. But if you need to stop that person from what they're doing, if you're going to confront them, you're going to have to take them out at gunpoint, meaning you're going to point your gun at them and tell them, don't move. Now, look, I have taken off a number of burglars inside of residences, homes, what have you. I will always have my pistol out. In fact, if I do a building search because there's an alarm there, if I'm doing a building search because there's signs of a break-in, my gun is always out. I'm leading with my gun as I search the building. If I confront somebody, I identify myself. Here, you would just say church security, don't move, and then tell them, I always start with don't move. So that way, if they do move, I can deal with whatever, but just tell them don't move. And then you're going to have them lay on the ground, call 911, and then have them come take them into custody. Let the law enforcement know on 911 that you have somebody at gunpoint. I would rather you, though, not engage them, call 911, let the police deal with it. But if I understand that sometimes some of you, it'll take an hour for an officer to come to your church. They might escape and you want to stop them. I'm just saying, if you are going to confront them, that you probably should take them out at gunpoint. All right. If you're going to take somebody out at gunpoint, in my newsletter, I have a link to this article, The Best Concealed Carry Insurance for Church Security. Not for you walking down the street, not for you and your wife in your house, not for you traveling, but for you specifically working in church security. I broke down the 11 major companies doing this right now, and I gave my recommendation. You can see the recommendation in my notes for this show if you're watching on YouTube, and has everything there. All right, next up, we're going to travel over to a bomb scare at St. Henry Church in Bayonne. Now, this happened in Bayonne, New Jersey. It prompted a large police response on Saturday. After the 5:30 Mass, police informed the church's pastor, Reverend Raul Gaviola, about a threat involving an active shooter and a pipe bomb set to go off at 7 p.m. Now, K-9 units and the Jersey City Bomb Squad were called to the scene, but the church was declared secure. I just want to give you a heads up that if somebody wants to pull off an active shooter or even a bombing, they normally don't call ahead of time to let people know, especially the police, because it kind of defeats the purpose, right? Normally it's because they want to disrupt a service, disrupt whatever's happening at the location that they're calling into. I'm definitely not minimizing these threats, but what I would do if I were in your shoes is I would continue with my service. I would not stop it. The safety ministry is just going to have to work a little bit harder, and I would ask police if they can stand by while people come in, while we have the service. And depending on where you work, if you're in Oakland or San Francisco or Seattle, I doubt they would stand by because there are just no cops there. But I would not close it down just because somebody calls in and says, you have a bomb and we're going to do an active shooter. You're letting them win. And remember, we have to keep our churches open. All right, next up, I just want to talk about, we're going to go off track for a minute. We're going to talk about faith and politics. I noticed a series of articles that all came out on the same day that talked about Christian nationalism. Now, these articles all came out on the same day from different people in different ways, all decrying Christian nationalism, meaning you love your country and you're a Christian. Now, I've been accused of being a Christian nationalist because I believe that Jesus died for my sins. I believe that he's our Lord and Savior. And I also love my country. Now, I don't put the country above God. It is God, family, then my country. But somehow, because I am a conservative Christian, I am now a Christian nationalist. And I think a lot of you are in the same boat. And I just wanted to comment on these articles all coming out at the same time. It was very, very coordinated. And it kind of bothered me a little bit. All right. So look, you've got this one. I just left the United Methodist Church for an alliance of Baptist congregation. And then you've got this other one, Christian nationalist danger focus of a church talk. And then next up, you've got people of faith and conscience oppose Christian nationalism. It's a guest opinion by Interfaith Racial Equity Network. Now, I read all these articles. I read others that showed up too, and they all appear to be done by churches. And I'm not targeting a specific church here, but churches that might have flags like that out front or some other stuff that goes against the teachings of the Bible. And because you speak out against churches that are going against the Bible, somehow that makes you a Christian nationalist. What I found in these articles, it bothered me because they all came out at the same time on the same day. And that some nut job is going to read these and then go to specific churches to either create mayhem, interrupt your church service, assault people, or do something else, because we are seeing people with mental illness going out and doing things like that after reading news stories. I bring it up for you not to take sides, which it is kind of funny because these people are definitely left-leaning and they're calling out the right because we call out some of the anti-biblical stuff we see on the left. It just is very entertaining. I'm bringing it up to you because I do think that this kind of stuff triggers some people to go after churches, and you work in church security. might have to worry about it. So just my 2 cents. We're going to move on to our sex crimes, which are dominating right now. I just want you to read those stories, click on them on the newsletter, click on them, and let me know what you think in the comments. Leave a comment. Let me know what I may not be able to respond to all your comments, but if the video doesn't totally blow up, I read just about all of them. I mean, if a video blows up and there's thousands of comments, I can't read them all, but if there's like 100 comments or even 200, I can normally go through them all and read them. So, and it's nice hearing what you have to say. All right, next up, we got sex crimes. Before we get into sex crimes, I just need to have a chat with you for just a minute. Each week, I go over all the sex crime stories that I see that come out in the news for that week. I only pick stuff that just occurred. I tend not to talk about people that were convicted because we probably already talked about those. Sometimes I will if I think it's important or we haven't covered it. But these are all fresh for the most part. It makes me sad to see this each week because I'm seeing more sex crimes than anything else besides property crimes. Property crimes pretty much dominate church crime, but more so than crimes against persons. And I'm going to have an article come out on Wednesday. Now, that article is going to talk about how churches will spend an inordinate amount of time doing active shooter and no time at all about identifying predators, sexual predators that are in their church, that might be in their church, and then rooting them out, and then talking about patrol procedures that when security's walking around doing their rounds about checking on kids and looking for danger signs inside. Most churches don't do any of that, but they'll do active shooter. Look, the chances of an active shooter are very slim at your church. It's not zero, so you should be training for it. But the chances of a sexual predator coming to your church, that's pretty high. I mean, very high. And so I think my point on Wednesday is we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about all the sex crimes that are occurring each week, and we're going to break out about what you should do about it and what you can do about it. So let's go back to this Quarryville church leader that was arrested for sexual abuse of a minor. Now, a Bible study instructor at New Providence Church of God in Quarryville, Pennsylvania, was arrested for allegedly repeatedly sexually abusing a girl. According to Pennsylvania State Police, Michael Hess, 49, is accused of inappropriate contact with the child during Bible study sessions over the course of a school year, starting when she was 7 to 8 years old. Now, the victim recently came forward with the allegations, leading to Hess being charged with multiple offenses, including aggravated indecent assault and corruption of minors. The church has cooperated with authorities in preliminary hearings set for October 7th. First and foremost, we need to pray for this young lady. That is, I don't even know what to say. That's so horrible. Now, look, if this is the one victim, there's going to be multiple. Almost all the time when you have a crime like this, there are victims that go back years. And so if this guy was ever at your church, you're going to need to talk to your congregation, and it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation, and talk about what the alleged crime was, and then say, if there was some inappropriate behavior with him and somebody you love or you, please let us know. And then when they let you know, you're going to contact the police. When you contact the police, you're going to let them know what occurred with this guy, where it was at, show them the news story so the officer can follow up with that. I can't guarantee 100% there's more victims. More than likely there will be. Now, look, I can't believe that this happened in a Bible study and nobody noticed. Now, look, I think it's important for you to talk to your kids and tell them that it is not appropriate for anybody to touch your private parts. Have that conversation with them. Talk about inappropriate touching, and then tell them that they should come to you if something like that happens, that they would never be in trouble, and tell them how to react if something like that happens, like fighting back, and then to let you know as soon as possible. I think those are all conversations we should be having with all kids. The amount of sexual abuse that happens to our children, if you looked at the numbers, it would astound you. All right, next up, we're going to talk about an Ohio priest that was reassigned after failing to report child abuse images. Now, Father Barry Steck-Schulte, I can't even say his name, Steck-Schulte. He's a priest from the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and he's been reassigned despite admitting to ordering the destruction of potential child sex abuse images found on a church computer in 2012. Now, the father then at Holy Rosary Church in St. Mary's instructed a deacon to destroy a hard drive containing inappropriate images, including child pornography. The incident was not reported to police until 2018, 6 years after the images were discovered. The father resigned from his post at St. Susanna Church in July, but has since been assigned to rural parishes outside of Dayton. I would not want this guy to be my pastor, because apparently if you see something wrong and illegal he's going to ignore it. That is so wrong. All right. So it doesn't matter who you are. If you find child porn on a computer, you need to call the police. Now, it is a felony to possess it, and it's a sin not to report it. In Matthew 18:6, Jesus warns against harm to children, saying, "But if anyone causes one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck." In Ephesians 5:11, it calls for believers to have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. And the Bible also teaches that justice should be upheld and wrongdoers must be held accountable. And that's Isaiah 1:17. Lastly, Romans 13:1-2 urges Christians to submit to governing authorities and uphold laws that are established for the common good. Failing to do so is not only a legal offense, but also a sin against God's order for justice. Now, look, to be clear, it is absolutely unbelievable that any of us would hide a heinous crime like this. Look, I get it. We should forgive. And, he didn't victimize me. I wasn't part of the victim chain on this. And, certainly, I would want to show grace and mercy, just like I want God to show grace and mercy to me. But that doesn't mean you're not held accountable for the consequences of what has happened. Here, the father did not disclose a serious felony to law enforcement and allowed stuff to be destroyed. I cannot conceive that. It's crimes against our children. It just blows me away. All right. On to Texas, because, hey, we can't talk about sex crimes without having Texas involved, because, man, Texas, you've been on a roll. You've been in every single week's newsletter for months on sexual assaults. It is just crazy what's happening in Texas. All right. So a Texas priest faces additional sexual assault charges involving multiple women. Now, a Texas grand jury has indicted Roman Catholic priest Anthony Audiong on additional sexual assault charges, bringing the total to 7 charges involving 3 women. Audiong, who was arrested in July of 24, is accused of preying on women he met while providing spiritual guidance in Texas and Louisiana. The latest indictment adds 4 first-degree sexual assault charges, which could result in life in imprisonment if he is convicted. Audiong allegedly exploited his role as a spiritual advisor to manipulate and coerce women into inappropriate relationships. Now, investigations also uncovered child abuse material in his possession, though no formal charges related to those allegations have been filed. Audiong remains in custody with a $5.5 million bail, while more than 8 women have come forward with similar accusations. Now, there's going to be more abuse victims than just the ones that were presented here. If he was a priest at your church, you should immediately reach out to your congregation and look for additional victims. Many will be afraid to come forward. So you must make them comfortable to come talk to you about this issue and with their local police department. If you have a victim in your area, call the police, let the investigators know about this particular case in Texas and what is alleged at your church. All right. Now, a Texas youth pastor was sentenced to 50 years for sexually abusing minors. Now, Marvin Scales, a former youth pastor for Waxahachie, Texas, was sentenced to, here we are with Texas again, to 50 years in prison for multiple counts of child sexual abuse, including fathering a child with a 14-year-old. Now, the investigation began in August of 23 when police were alerted to his involvement in the girl's life. Further investigations revealed that Scales had a history of inappropriate behavior with children from his congregation, often during overnight trips or sleepovers. Authorities found recordings of the incidents, leading to the discovery of more victims. Scales, already a registered sex offender, will not be eligible for parole. Now, look, how was a registered sex offender allowed to be alone with children from his congregation? All right, we want God to forgive us, but part of that is realizing that we must forgive others. However, that doesn't mean that you would let a convicted sex offender that has to register to be alone with children or women from your church. Honestly, I don't understand. Why aren't these churches doing background investigations? A simple Google search and a check of the Megan's Law database would have revealed that he was a sex offender. Now, we need to get our act together, especially Texas. Come on, Texas. Sex crimes dominate this newsletter, not because I'm cherry picking the stories, but because this is what's happening. In Texas, you're leading the pack with these cases. I'm not picking on you. I'm just giving you a warning that it may be because there's so much going on in Texas that people feel comfortable about coming out about past sexual assault. But Texas, you got a problem, man. You're number one in every newsletter. We're going to move on to Gateway Church. Now, Gateway Church has been having a huge problem with misconduct, sexual misconduct in their church. Now, recently, the Gateway Church revoked the membership of a critical congregant. So Valentina Hansen is a former member of Gateway Church in Texas, and she had her membership revoked after publicly criticizing the church's handling of sexual abuse allegations against its founder, Robert Morris. Hansen claimed the church lacked transparency and accountability, which they are lacking in transparency and accountability, particularly regarding finances and the employment of a registered sex offender. We just talked about this. After her criticism, she was escorted from church property by armed security. The church leadership cited sowing discord as a reason for her dismissal. All right, let's talk about the saga of the Gateway Church in Texas. Here we are, 3 stories in a row with Texas. So you have seen Gateway Church multiple times this year in the sexual assault section. I agree with this person that Gateway does not seem to be very transparent. You can see that in reading all the news stories. Now, with that said, I'm seeing incidents in the press about congregants, not just here, but other places, being excommunicated from their church. Now, in 2 recent examples, it seems to be done more for issues about non-biblical problems. Now, this bothers me a little bit. It makes me think of what you, as a church security team member, should do if your church asks you to remove somebody from your church that hasn't done anything biblically wrong or hasn't even committed any crimes. So here you have and use this as an example. You have a member of your church that is bringing forth injustices like the Bible tells us to do, and it's alleged that the church excommunicates that person based on that, saying you're sowing discord. Now, in law enforcement, we don't get involved in non-crimes. So what we will do is we'll do something called a civil standby to make sure that the peace is kept. So here, if she's being excommunicated and wants to be walked out of property, we would merely just say, hey, we're not going to do anything. You do whatever you're going to do. And we're just going to make sure nobody commits any crimes. And then you make those people deal with it. Now, personally, I wouldn't let church leaders use me as their armed political enforcer. And I bring it up because I'm seeing it more and more in the news. So I want you to think about these issues ahead of time, especially with the election coming up. Everybody's losing their mind right now. And think about what your response would be. So again, one of the things, you guys will often ask me questions about your church and say, like, I don't agree with this or that. And I always tell you that if your church is not asking you to do anything that goes against the Bible, that you should probably listen to what's being told to you. But if the church is asking you to do something that goes against the Bible, then it's probably time to find a new church. So here, I want you to think about what you're doing. So let's say you were the armed security and you were asked to escort this lady out, and it's because she was sowing discord. Well, doesn't the Bible tell us to seek justice for victims? And you see, and the church is obviously doing something wrong with so many people being arrested and dismissed sexual abuse allegations. And it is apparent to me that they are doing things that, when I read the stories, and again, I'm only going for the press, or reading press stories, it does seem like there are things that are going against the Bible from that church. And they ask you to remove that person. Would you remove them? Personally, I would not. I can tell you right now, I would have left that church long ago based on what's occurring there. And it goes back to, does your church tell you to do something against the Bible or what have you? And I'll give an example. I was a Presbyterian. I don't go to the Presbyterian church anymore because of they are going against biblical teachings. Just, you guys will let me know in the comments. I can't remember if it's Presbyterian USA, but my church was one of those. So just my 2 cents. I bring it up to you so you can think about these things ahead of time and what you would do. All right, next up, we got a man that is vandalizing a church in New York City. Now, a statue of Virgin Mary was vandalized early Tuesday morning at the presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary Church in Jamaica, Queens. Surveillance footage captured a man using a rock to damage the statue around 3:15 in the morning, leaving the face, side, and hands of the statue broken. The statue, originally donated by Mary Immaculate Hospital in 2009, is located in front of the church rectory on Parsons Boulevard. This incident marks the second act of vandalism at the church in recent years. NYPD is investigating. Now, look, this is what I mean by, say, get a 4K video system. You can see in the back right here, you can see him clearly. And you got a great video of who he is. You can see his face right here. You clearly can see him. That's why I want you to have a 4K video system so we can identify perpetrators and figure out crimes. Now, look, the NYPD has a very good facial recognition program. where they can compare his face to anyone that was ever arrested in New York and then figure out who he is. I can guarantee you some cop is going to see that guy walking down the street and then be able to arrest him for the crimes that occurred here. So that's what I'm talking about when I say 4K video system. That's what I want you to do. All right, next up, you got a serial church burglar arrested in Cameron County, Texas. Now, Daniel Chavez, 37, was identified as a suspect in several break-ins in San Felipe de Jesus Church in Cameron Park and Iglesia de Rios de Agua Viva in Brownsville. Chavez reportedly attempted to break into San Felipe de Jesus Church on August 22nd, followed by successful burglaries where lawn equipment was stolen. Surveillance footage eventually led to his arrest. There we go with video surveillance again. 4K, super important. He was arrested August 27th after he was found wearing the same clothing seen in the videos. Again, this is why we want a burglar and a fire alarm and a 4K video system. I remind you every week. This is why. We got a Minnesota priest under investigation for an alleged $72,000 fraud scheme. The investigation has been launched in southeastern Minnesota, focusing on Reverend Prince Amala. Oh man, I can't even say his name. He's an Indian priest. He's in the Diocese of Winona Rochester. This priest, who served as pastor at St. Felix in Wabasha and St. Agnes in Kellogg, is accused of requesting nearly $72,000 in gifts and loans from parishioners for fraudulent reasons. Now, despite being asked to stop soliciting money in May, this priest continued to seek financial support from parishioners, now allegedly under false pretenses. He resigned on September 1st and has since returned to India. Church officials are cooperating with law enforcement, but no criminal charges have been filed at this time. Like if they file charges, he's not going to get extradited from India. Now, the cost and the legal wrangling that you're going to have to do to get him from India back to America for charging, it's not going to happen. They'll have that warrant sitting in the system forever in case he returns. He'll get hooked up and then brought back. But it's hard enough for us to get a murder suspect extradited from Mexico, let alone a fraudster from India. The one question I do have, and again, I'm not Catholic. I've never been Catholic. So a question for the Catholics out there. Why would the church allow him to go back to India? I guess they can't stop him. I guess he just quits and says, I'm going back to India, and off he goes. I just wonder how that works, because I thought that the church was a little bit more involved. I hope that the church didn't let him go back to India and he's still connected with the church in some way, because that would make me sad. He needs to be held. I mean, you can forgive, but he's got to be held accountable for his crimes, right? All right, we're going to move to international stories. We got some big ones coming out of Africa right now. Now, there were some violent attacks on Nigerian churches that left several people dead and dozens of people kidnapped, and there's even a worse one coming up here in a minute. In recent attacks by armed Fulani herdsmen in Nigeria's Kaduna state, multiple Christian communities were targeted. On September 15th, 3 Christians were killed and 30 were kidnapped, including a pastor, during worship services at evangelical and Catholic churches in Kajuru County. Now, similar assaults occurred earlier in the month, including murders and abductions in nearby villages. Authorities are working to rescue those that were abducted. Now, these incidents highlight Nigeria's ongoing crisis, where thousands of Christians face violence each year. Now, this is a weekly occurrence for Christians in Nigeria and surrounding countries. Nigerians, my suggestion to you, because the United States is obviously the number one country of my followers, but number 2 is Nigeria. My recommendation to you is to look at your church. I would send an observer out far enough up ahead that they can communicate with the church, but see trouble coming. When they see trouble coming, you have somebody posted at your front door. Let them know trouble's coming. They give the warning to the rest of the church, and you either evacuate and run, lock up and lock down your church, barricade doors and windows, arm yourself with some kind of a weapon. And to be clear, self-defense is not. Barricade those doors and windows. And when the attackers, if they get through, attack them. People tend not to continue the attack if you impose your will and attack them back. Mostly attackers are cowards. Just my 2 cents for all the Nigerians that are watching. If you're from Nigeria, I would love to hear your comments. Please leave a comment. If you don't want to do it publicly, shoot me an email. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. All you got to do is reply to one of my newsletters, and then we'll talk. I would love to hear what's going on. Now, on to another story. This one's even worse. Now, jihadists killed 26 Christians during worship in Burkina Faso. Now, in late August of 24, Islamist extremists in Burkina Faso carried out a brutal 2-day killing spree murdering hundreds of civilians, including 26 Christians, where they slit their throats during a worship service at a Protestant church in Senaba. The militants tied the hands of the victims and slit their throats. This attack is part of a wider jihadist insurgency, and it's one of the deadliest incidents in the country since that insurgency began. Again, if you live in Burkina Faso, I would follow the same advice that I gave the Nigerians. And again, if you want to reach out to me, I would love to have a conversation with you and to see what we can do for you in your churches in Burkina Faso. Next up, we move over to England, and there's a man that was in mental distress that barricaded himself in a church in Norfolk. And it is ongoing right now. They are trying to get him to come out, but apparently it looks like it's some mental illness going on. They've cordoned off the area and they're trying to get him to surrender. And then on to Europe, we've got 9 arson attacks that targeted European Catholic churches. Now, this happened in the Netherlands, Italy, Ireland, France, and Germany. I don't think all of them are connected. I think some of them they just happen to happen at the same time. I just bring this up because American churches, I think our time is coming, and I think we need to be paying attention to what is going on in Europe right now, because that's an indicator of what's going to happen here. Okay, thank you for coming. Go ahead, hit subscribe, leave a comment. I love reading what you guys have to say. My next goal is to get to 1 million people. I'd be happy to get 200,000 at this point. But I like that you guys are spreading the word and sending this information out to everybody. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. There are 2 things I want you to do when you leave here to help protect your church. Number 1 is to pray constantly and unceasingly for the safety of you, your church, and your family. And I also want you to remember your ABCs. Always be caring.